shut your damn mouth and get back in the car. Who the hell do you think you are, looking at me like that? You think that uniform's gonna save you? Halverson snarled through clenched teeth, eyes blazing like they could burn through steel, one hand gripping his gun handle, ready to explode. Malcolm Reed, black, shirt soaked in grease, still holding the gas pump, stood tall like a steel statue in the eye of a storm. The entire gas station held its breath, but Halverson didn't flinch. Under flickering neon lights like an omen, surrounded by a baby's scream and a crowd frozen in horror, he slapped the cuffs on Malcolm, right in front of a live-stream camera catching every second. What Halverson didn't know, the man he was stomping on wasn't just a veteran. Malcolm was a former Navy SEAL, a fire waiting to ignite, a force ready to burn down the rotten system Halverson bowed to. Will Malcolm's righteous fire rise in full blaze? Or will the SEAL hero be crushed in a storm of betrayal and lies? Before continuing the story, tell me which city you're watching from. I want to know how far this video has come. Malcolm Reed's old pickup creaked sharply as he braked into the Sunoco gas station, tucked along Route 41. A puff of red dust rose from the tires, hovered, then slowly settled onto the scorching asphalt. The sun was slipping below the horizon, casting the last streaks of light across the hood in a blaze of orange. It was peak summer in Florida, and the heat felt like the breath of a forge. Malcolm sighed and opened the door. He stepped out, his movements heavy with a day full of sun and grease. His dark blue polo was smeared with dust and engine oil, sweat soaking through the back. A worn baseball cap sagged low over his tired, sunken eyes. His right hand was slightly swollen from hitting a metal edge while opening a motor cover, but he didn't care. All he was thinking about now was gas, a cold soda, and maybe catching the last few innings of the Rays game on TV. He swiped his card. The pump lights blinked. He selected regular unleaded. The nozzle clicked. Gas flowed. The smell of fuel mixed with the acrid scent of hot asphalt and cigarette smoke drifted from behind the store, where a young employee sat puffing a cheap cigarette. At the corner of the lot, two kids, a boy and a girl, giggled near the air pump, occasionally glancing at Malcolm, then huddling together like he might scold them. He didn't care. His eyes were locked on the pump display, but his mind was still. Silence is the only thing I've truly valued since the war, he once told a former teammate. Malcolm's fingers were calloused, veins visible. Fingers that once pulled a trigger in chaos now gently hold a nozzle. He was still strong, in the way someone who has survived learns to be, but the quiet way he stood could easily be mistaken for weakness. Cicadas buzzed. The station was peaceful, at least on the surface. The kid smoking out back didn't notice anyone, nodding along to music in his earbuds. No one knew the man standing there once wore the insignia of the Navy's most elite unit, and Malcolm didn't need them to know. He just wanted to fill up and leave. But something felt off. A subtle, sharp twinge pricked the back of his neck, the instinct of a soldier who's survived ambushes. He glanced at the side mirror. The road was empty, but it seemed like something had flickered back there. He didn't turn around, not out of fear, but because he had trained himself a long time ago to always be ready. The first sound wasn't a siren or a radio. It was tires rolling slowly across the rough pavement, steady, dry, dragging like claws scraping concrete. Malcolm didn't need to look. He'd heard enough patrol cars in his life to know the difference between accidental and intentional. This one was intentional, clearly. A dull white cruiser with dust-faded sheriff lettering stopped right behind his truck. No lights, no siren, no warning, like a predator crouching low before the pounce. Malcolm didn't turn, didn't make eye contact, didn't move hastily. His hand stayed on the pump, gas still flowing, but the sweat-soaked shirt on his back now clung cold against his skin, damp, a different kind of wet, one every combat vet would recognize, survival instincts screaming inside the chest. A click, the cruiser door opened, heavy boots struck the pavement, echoing in the still air. Each step was deliberate, not walking but grinding down with purpose. Malcolm checked the mirror again. No need to see the face, the thick frame, right arm swinging close to the hip, said enough. That hand wasn't swinging freely. That hand was near a weapon. Just then, one of the two kids stopped talking. The girl, maybe 10 years old, grabbed her little brother's hand, staring at Malcolm. Her eyes weren't innocent. They were sharp with fear, like she'd seen this scene before too many times. Malcolm inhaled deeply, not fast, not loud, just enough to steady himself. He gently returned the nozzle to the pump. His eyes stayed on the meter. He didn't want to turn around. Not out of fear, but because in situations like this, eye contact can be the very thing that keeps someone from going home. The boots stopped right behind him. "Don't speak first," Malcolm reminded himself. "Don't give him a reason to think you're resisting." He heard the wind whistle across the gas station canopy, mixing with the heavy breathing of the man behind him. A short silence, long enough for Malcolm to know the man was sizing him up, inspecting him from boots to neck. A rough voice broke the air, sharp as a blade. "Pumping gas this late, huh?" Malcolm's fingers tightened. Deputy Rick Halverson stepped out of the cruiser with the posture he always used when he wanted to make one thing clear. "I am the law." Feet shoulder-thigh apart, shoulders squared, belly pushed forward just enough to flash the badge under the neon lights of the gas station. His right hand, trained by bias more than instinct, hovered near the grip of his holstered gun. His eyes scanned the scene. An old pickup, a black man in an oil-stained polo shirt, standing with his back turned. No fear, no rush, no glance back. Just pumping gas like the world belonged to him. Halverson narrowed his eyes. Another black guy, dirty shirt, plastic hands, beat-up truck, out here in the middle of the night? There's only one kind of man that fits that description, he thought to himself, lip curling and a hint of disdain. He walked closer, boots knocking dryly against the concrete in the thick night air. He stopped about 2 meters from Malcolm, eyes boring into the back of the man's neck. His voice came out low, heavy with the weight of authority. "Where do you live?" Malcolm turned slowly, his gaze neither defiant nor submissive. It was the kind of look that got under Halverson's skin because it was too calm. "Not far from here," Malcolm replied, voice deep and steady. Halverson didn't answer. He stepped half a pace closer, just enough that his breath hit Malcolm's face. Cigarette smoke, sweat, and stale coffee blending into a foul, oppressive cloud. He lowered his voice, each word scraping like sandpaper. "Little strange to be pumping gas out here this late, don't you think?" Malcolm said nothing. His hand stayed on the gas nozzle. He didn't flinch, didn't avoid, but his body seemed to carry more weight, not out of fear, but because this kind of scrutiny was too familiar. Across the lot, a woman in a silver SUV was watching. Her face was tight. She leaned forward, turned on her camera, and propped the phone on the steering wheel. A baby in the back seat started to wail, a sound that pierced the night like a quiet alarm. Behind the station, a young clerk had taken his earbuds out. The half-smoked cigarette in his fingers fell to the tile floor unnoticed. Halverson planted a hand on his belt, thumb brushing the edge of his holster. He didn't ask anything else, just stared at Malcolm like he was trying to count every hair on the man's head, every bead of sweat running down his collar. "Your silence doesn't mean I'll stop." In Halverson's head, a whole script was playing out. Maybe he didn't know who Malcolm was, but he didn't need to. He only needed a reason. Malcolm could feel it clearly. Every sneer, every stare was nudging him closer to a pit that men like him had been shoved into their entire lives. "Keep your tone even. Don't blink too fast. Don't give him a reason to think you're hiding something," he reminded himself, like it was a survival mantra. But he also knew, with men like Halverson, doing nothing was already reason enough. "Where's your ID?" Halverson snapped, no longer pretending to be polite. "You got papers? I want to see 'em." The way he stressed papers made it sound like he was addressing an undocumented immigrant, or a criminal who needed to be processed immediately. Malcolm calmly reached into his back pocket and pulled out a worn leather wallet. Every move was deliberate, controlled, unmistakably clear. Not aggressive, but not submissive either. Across the station, the woman in the SUV had the camera running. She stayed silent, but her eyes never left the scene. Her child clung tightly to her arm. Malcolm opened his wallet and wordlessly held out a card. Halverson snatched it, as if Malcolm might suddenly take it back. He didn't examine it professionally. He flipped it around like he was digging for something, some typo, some bad address, anything that might give him an excuse. Then he saw it, an old but intact military ID card, clearly printed with the words, Malcolm Reed, U.S. Navy, Special Warfare Command. Halverson curled his lip, unimpressed. "So that's who you are," he muttered, then tossed the wallet onto the hood of Malcolm's truck, letting it slide a bit before stopping under the harsh white light. To him, that card was just another scrap of paper, or worse, a cheap attempt at earning respect. Inside Halverson's head, the contempt screamed, "Don't think that badge gets you a pass. Guys like you all learn how to fake being soldiers. These military titles mean nothing now. They sell badges like this at flea markets." He asked, voice laced with mockery, "So, what'd you do in the Navy?" "Not out of interest, just to cut a little deeper with words." Malcolm didn't answer. His eyes stayed calm but alert. No downward glance, no sudden blink, no retreat. That silence, controlled and unflinching, made Halverson uneasy, like, for the first time, someone was seeing through him. Malcolm bent to retrieve his wallet. His grip tightened slightly. These were hands that had once pulled triggers, lifted wounded comrades out of fire zones. Now they held back rage with the same discipline that had kept him alive through years of service. Inside him was a kind of anger that had structure, a sharp, clean fury. Not reckless, but sharp enough to cut, and Halverson felt it. He couldn't name it, but it made him uneasy. A hot breeze passed, the scent of gasoline mixed with smoke and the suffocating tension of a Florida summer night. Halverson folded his arms, took half a step back, eyes still locked on Malcolm. "I'll be checking this out," he said, voice heavy with condescension. "You stay right here. Don't touch anything." Malcolm didn't respond. He stood tall, eyes fixed on a point in the distance where the headlights cast Halverson's shadow onto the brick wall behind the station. He said nothing, but it was that very silence that made the deputy most uncomfortable, with the badge on his chest, and in that moment, Malcolm thought, "If you start with disrespect, then I'll finish with the truth." "I'm just pumping gas," Malcolm said evenly, without backing down. "I'm not causing trouble, not breaking any laws. I just left the dock, worked all day with a buddy. He can confirm it." He spoke slowly, clearly, looking Halverson straight in the eye. No bowing, no dodging. It wasn't defiance. It was the presence of someone who had nothing to hide. Halverson smirked, a crooked smile without an ounce of goodwill. "Working the dock, huh? Shipping stuff. Doing labor?" he repeated, like coaxing out a contradictory statement. "Got proof of that? What's this buddy's name?" His voice started punching on the words. "Proof? Doing what? Where?" As if interrogating a suspect, Malcolm took a light breath. "I don't believe I need to account for every step I took today. I'm not under arrest. I'm not being investigated. I'm just pumping gas like everyone else." Halverson cut in sharply. "Don't play lawyer with me. I'm the one asking questions here." He circled around, trying to box Malcolm in with pressure and presence. The man now facing Malcolm was no longer just a cop. He was someone clawing to regain control he never really had. A man used to believing his word was law, and that any resistance was guilt. Malcolm didn't flinch. He only tilted his head slightly, expression carved in stone. "I'm not playing anything. I'm reminding you we both live under the same law." Halverson let out a dry, bitter laugh. "Right, and I'm the one enforcing it." His eyes narrowed. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by a middle-aged black man covered in oil and sweat speaking to him like an equal. He was used to nods, mumbled replies, eyes dropped, and yes sirs whispered like apologies, not a calm, steady voice like a mountain standing its ground. Across the station, the kid behind the store had ditched his cigarette and stepped outside, leaning on the wall, staring. A woman in a silver SUV had shut off her car, phone raised, recording steadily. The crowd wasn't large. yet, but attention was gathering like a storm under the surface. Malcolm felt it, but he wasn't leaning on the crowd for validation. He just wanted to finish up and leave, like always. But this time, peace wasn't something the other side intended to allow. Halverson crossed his arms, his breath a little faster, his eyes never leaving Malcolm. "You sure know your rights," he muttered, trying to sound casual but failing to hide his bitterness. "Makes me wonder, you ever been arrested before?" Malcolm raised an eyebrow, gaze steady. "I've held rank." A pause, then flat and clear as a drum beat. "And I know that a badge doesn't give anyone the right to humiliate others, especially without cause." Halverson's mouth twitched. Inside, something frayed. He realized he was being made a fool of, and in front of people. He felt useless. He needed to do something, reclaim control. He leaned toward Malcolm, voice nearly hissing. "So you claim you were in the military? Who proves that? Where's your ID?" Malcolm stared. "You've seen it, you held it, and you know it's real." He didn't shout, but each word landed like a nail into stone. This calm wasn't a mask, it was earned, forged in places where slogans meant nothing, and composure kept you alive. And that very composure, that quiet steel, was exactly what Halverson couldn't stand. Nearby, a young man who had just finished filling up didn't get into his car. He leaned against a pump, pulled out his phone, and filmed. A little girl walking past with her parents tugged her mom's sleeve. "Why's that man being yelled at?" No one answered. The air thickened. Every second made it heavier. In Halverson's head, one thought screamed, "If you can't control this guy, you lose face." And to someone like him, losing face in public was worse than losing his job. He hadn't said a word yet, but his right hand was curling, and Malcolm felt the shift in energy in the rhythm of his own heartbeat. One thought flickered through Malcolm's mind. "It's coming. I know what he'll do, and this time, everyone will see it." Halverson didn't ask anything else. He gave no warning. He simply hissed, "Turn around. Hands behind your back." Malcolm stayed upright, unmoving. He didn't resist. He wasn't afraid. He knew that any sudden movement, no matter how small, could be twisted into resisting arrest. Slowly, he placed the gas nozzle back into the holder, then brought both hands behind him, palms open, showing total cooperation. But Halverson wasn't looking for reason. He wanted control, and to him, control meant forcing someone down. The first click of the cuffs sounded, like a hammer strike in the hearts of those watching. Cold steel clamped around Malcolm's wrists, tighter than necessary. Halverson twisted him harshly, slamming him into the side of the pickup, metal smashing into shoulder bone. The impact rang out sharp and brutal. Malcolm clenched his teeth. No scream, no reaction. He knew this wasn't about pain. It was a final test, to see if he would break. The first phone rose high from the silver SUV. The woman live-streamed with both hands. "He didn't do anything," she shouted. "Why are you arresting someone in broad daylight like this?" Halverson heard it. He saw the tiny lights from phone cameras now pointing his way. But instead of stopping, he doubled down. He shoved Malcolm harder, dug into his pockets, pulled out a wallet, keys, a folded receipt, tossing them onto the hood like evidence. Each move was driven by ego unraveling, no longer policing but punishing a man who dared not bow. A girl, maybe 12, stepped up from the curb, held her phone high, whispering to the camera, "Please share this. Share it now." Her voice shook, but her eyes burned with anger. A child shouldn't yet know. A young man near the vending machine turned. An elderly man stepped out from the bakery next door, holding an iPad with trembling hands. The gas station froze. Only cameras and outrage were in motion. Malcolm said nothing. He knew no words would cut through the bias cuffing him. He didn't need to plead. He needed the crowd not to look away, like so many had before. And this time, they didn't. A man in a work uniform yelled, "Racial profiling, stop it! He didn't do anything!" A woman screamed, "Call the news! Someone call the goddamn news!" Halverson started to falter, but he didn't retreat. He still thought he could claw it back, by standing firm, by not yielding to public pressure. "I have to shut this down before it explodes," he thought, tightening the cuffs until Malcolm's wrists turned red. He was wrong. Dead wrong. Because the live stream had long outrun the gas station signal. Online, hundreds had already started commenting. Messages flooded the screen. He's not resisting. This is abuse of power. This is the cop doing. The video was being shared by the second. Malcolm lifted his head, steadying himself against the truck. His eyes met the girl's, the one recording, not afraid, not angry, but sending a message of responsibility, as if to say, keep recording, don't let them lie anymore. Halverson panted, sweat trailing down his back. He didn't yet know how far the live stream had spread, but he knew it was no longer in his hands. And then he made the worst choice possible. He kept going. He turned to the crowd and shouted, "This is standard procedure. Step back. This is police business." But no one stepped back. No one left. An older woman stood tall, raising her hand. Police business is to protect people, not humiliate them. Malcolm still said nothing. But that silence, unbroken, unbowed, was the very thing that made the moment irreversible. He was cuffed, searched like a criminal, but standing tall, like a man with honor. And every second of the live stream kept counting. The leathery thud of the wallet hitting the ground sounded dry, like a fragment of truth slipping from someone's grip. As Halverson continued his rough search, Malcolm's military ID card fell from the wallet and hit the concrete. Not a loud impact, but enough to draw a few glances. A teenager standing near the silver SUV stepped forward. Headlights reflected off the card, revealing a golden shield and the bold, crisp letters, USS Navy Special Warfare Command. The boy paused for a second after reading the name and designation. He looked at his mother, then lifted the card for the growing crowd to see. "Hey, is this guy actually a SEAL?" he asked. Not loud, but enough to slice through the tension like a taut fishing line snapping. Halverson spun around instantly, eyes flaring. He stormed over and snatched the card from the boy's hand as if seizing key evidence. He glanced at it, but instead of genuinely checking, he'd already decided on the verdict in his head. "Fake ID," he growled, voice cold as steel. "You can print this stuff off the internet. I've seen dozens of these." His voice didn't waver. It rang out with the certainty of someone who didn't need facts, just belief in his own suspicion. He turned to the crowd, waving the ID like evidence in a trial. "A fake soldier. They all pulled this stunt," he said, as if delivering a verdict before the trial even began. Silence rippled through the group. Eyes shifted. Some frowned. Others sighed. A few stepped back, as if sympathy had been a mistake. A man in a dress shirt muttered uncertainly, "They arrest real soldiers like that? Why isn't he saying anything?" A woman with glasses whispered to her friend, "The ID looks real, but these days anything can be faked." Halverson sensed the momentum, swinging his way. He glanced around, pleased by the spreading doubt. It was a feeling he knew well: suspicion, division, the fracturing of any group forced to witness scenes like this. And if no one believed the man in cuffs was real, then every wrong Halverson committed was instantly erased. But not everyone bought it. A woman by pump number 5 spoke up, her voice soft but razor-sharp. "He doesn't look like a fake." Heads turned. She was about 50, wearing a nurse's uniform, holding a bag of fast food. "I once cared for a Special Forces soldier in the ICU," she continued, steady as ever. "They don't say much. You just look into their eyes." That line made a few heads lift. The live-streaming girl kept filming, face flushed but hands steady. She aimed the camera at Malcolm, then turned it on Halverson, letting the audience see the contrast. Malcolm still didn't speak. He didn't need to. He wasn't arguing to be believed. He stood still, eyes unwavering. And it was that calm silence that made some uneasy. A fraud would react. A fraud would shout, plead, and demand justice right then. But this man, he only looked, with eyes that had seen death, seen comrades fall, and walk through fire without asking for glory. An old man sitting on a bench near the bakery suddenly said, "I was at Quezon, 68. No guy faking it could stand still like that." A deeper silence followed. Halverson looked around, realizing the control was slipping through his fingers like sand. Still, he held his stance, voice raised. "Words don't prove anything. A real soldier, a real card, So what? I'll verify it. Until then, keep quiet. Malcolm remained silent, but he held his head a bit higher. He knew truth doesn't have to shout to be real. It only needs someone clear-eyed enough to see it. And somewhere, among the hundreds watching the live stream, that clarity was waking up. The live stream kept rolling. No lag, no takedown. Unlike so many sensitive videos that get flagged and removed, the connection held steady, and justice, or a staged illusion of it, was being broadcast live. The girl filming stared at her screen, hands trembling but steady enough. The glow of the phone lit her face in a pale morning hue, alert, determined. Across the world, viewers poured in like a hive cracked open. One rewound the footage, zooming in on frame-by-frame details. Another cross-hected the ID against Department of Defense templates. Hundreds watched, some outraged, some cheering, some doubtful. Every comment cut like a knife, some sharp with justice, some rusted with bias. That's the internet, a loud courtroom without a judge, where truth and lies aren't sorted by evidence, but by speed and crowd volume. Looks real to me. He's a fraud. Watch how he doesn't react. Had cops done? This is abuse. Bet he printed that at Kinko's, lol. The online mob, a terrifying mix, able to turn a man into a symbol in 10 seconds, or grind his name into dust in under a minute. No one really knows what's happening, but everyone feels entitled to speak. And when a TikToker with over 3 million followers reposted the live stream with the caption, "This man might be a SEAL, if so, this cop is done," the spark hit the gas can. Views jumped from 1,000 to 10, 0, then 50, 0 in under 5 minutes. Cut clips spread fast. The ID in close-up, Malcolm shoved against the truck. His steely silence, a woman's distant cry. Each frame was a puzzle piece, but no one had the full picture. At the gas station, the divide was just as visible as the cracks in the pavement. One group stood near Halverson, arms crossed, nodding firmly. "It's fake. I've seen ones just like it. Dirt cheap at flea markets." A retired cop added, "If he were real, he wouldn't let himself get arrested. SEALs don't just stand there." But from the other side, the name Malcolm was spoken aloud for the first time, like a declaration. A woman shouted, "I believe him! Somebody run a background check!" A college student jumped off his bike, holding an iPad, speaking loudly as he typed, "We can find out. If he were a real SEAL, his name should be in the discharge records." Even the girl behind the camera had changed. No more shaky hands. She spoke directly to the lens. "His name is Malcolm Reed. If you know him, confirm it. They're trying to turn him into a criminal, but he doesn't look like one." On the other side of the screen, people began digging. Veterans got involved. One claimed he remembered Malcolm's name from a 2012 ceremony in Pensacola. Another posted a photo of an old strike team, commenting, "Third from the left. That's him, right?" And in the eye of the storm, Halverson still stood there, hand tense near his holster, eyes red with anger and pressure. He knew something was slipping away, but didn't understand what. To him, this had been a routine stop. A suspicious man, a beat-up truck, a non-compliant attitude. Now, he was the center of a viral storm. Malcolm still stood, handcuffed, searched, humiliated, but also at the center of something rising. Not fists, but eyes and phones. The truth wasn't clear yet, but collective instinct, that invisible, undeniable force, was tipping in one direction. If this man really was a SEAL, then not just Halverson, but this whole town, maybe the entire system, would have to answer for what was coming. "Captain, I suspected he was impersonating. I was just following initial investigation protocol," Halverson stammered, his throat dry as if filled with sand. His voice had lost all its former certainty, and none of the arrogance remained from when he ordered Malcolm's arrest minutes earlier. His words sounded like a man clinging to a collapsing chair, knowing the fall is inevitable, but still gripping tight. Estrada didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her tone was low and even, but every word sliced through pride like a blade. "You are publicly humiliating a retired Special Operations commander. You've just live-streamed the entire incident for the whole country to see." That single sentence shattered whatever excuse Halverson had prepared. It slammed down like a hammer onto the very badge pinned to his chest. The crowd fell completely silent. Not a word, not even a breath. The gas station, which moments ago buzzed with tension, now resembled a courtroom, watching a verdict being handed down. Halverson opened his mouth, tried to speak, but Estrada's stare shut him down. It was the look of someone who had once sent soldiers into danger, who had seen lives lost in combat, and who now stood face to face with the disgrace of a subordinate staining the institution she had spent her life protecting. Without waiting for him to recover, Estrada pulled out her phone, opened the internal comms, and issued a command with the precision of a battlefield order. "Deputy Halverson, effective immediately, you are relieved of duty. Surrender your badge and weapon, now." It was short, cold, final. Halverson stood frozen. His hands trembled as he unpinned the badge from his chest. The metallic click sounded like a chain being unfastened in a zoo. When he placed the badge in Estrada's hand, his face had gone pale. Not from the fear of losing his job, but because, for the first time, he had been stripped bare in front of a watching public. And the public was done staying quiet. A single clap rang out, then another. Soon, the entire gas station erupted in a rising wave of applause, erupting like a dam breaking after a heavy storm. The woman who had been live streaming waved into the camera, tears streaming down her cheeks. "He's real. He's a real SEAL." The young girl filming all along broke into tears too, but kept holding the phone, her hands shaking, eyes blazing. The live stream's view count surged, from 60,000 to 90, then 120,000 in under a minute. Social media lit up like wildfire. A U.S. veterans organization reposted the clip with the caption, "We owe him an apology and a thank you." In that moment, Malcolm Reed was no longer the man in handcuffs. He became a symbol, not because of the SEAL title, but because he stood tall while being dehumanized. He didn't scream, he didn't lash out, but he never bowed. And that, more than anything, stunned the crowd. Not everyone survives war, and even fewer keep their dignity when treated like a criminal. Estrada turned to Malcolm, her voice now gentler but still firm. "Mr. Reed, on behalf of the system, I apologize." Malcolm looked at her, paused, and gave a quiet nod. He didn't blame her. She did what was necessary. And she wasn't too late. A young officer stepped forward to remove the cuffs, already unlocked, but he gently supported Malcolm's wrists as if afraid of adding more harm. Malcolm rubbed his wrists, then raised his head and looked out at the crowd. He didn't say much, just one line, but that line echoed across social media for the next 48 hours. "Never judge a person by the clothes they wear, the car they drive, or the color of their skin." The words fell like the final drop into a glass already brimming with injustice, and then it overflowed, not with blood or violence, but with millions of shares, thousands of apologies, and a town forced to look itself in the mirror. Malcolm's story had just turned a new page. The clink of the handcuffs hitting the ground was barely audible, a small sound swallowed in the collective tension of hundreds holding their breath. But to Malcolm Reed, it was the click of fate, and the final full stop to years of nameless, faceless, voiceless endurance. His hands were still red, his wrists marked, but he didn't raise them in complaint, didn't lift his chin in defiance. He simply stood like someone who has never bowed. The once divided crowd fell silent, as if ruptured by the sheer quiet of his presence. No instructions needed. A wave of silence swept outward. A man who had been humiliated, doubted, and shackled by power now became the center of a respect he never asked for. There was no speech, no chant. But his eyes, his gestures, his stillness, each one struck a rhythm in people's hearts. Malcolm looked around slowly, not to assess the damage, but to say thank you. A middle-aged man raised a shaky salute. The young girl filming tightened her lips, about to cry. As Malcolm walked past her, he gave a slight nod. No need for words, just a look full of gratitude, and that small nod to a 12-year-old girl became a moment she would never forget. It taught her the first lesson in dignity. You don't have to shout to be heard. He stepped toward the woman holding the phone. His voice was low, warm, tired but unbroken. "Thank you for not turning away." She nodded repeatedly, choking up, as if his thanks only deepened the guilt of witnessing something she couldn't stop. No one forced Malcolm to speak. No one demanded a public response. But he knew sometimes silence is an answer, if people are willing to listen with their hearts. He looked back toward Estrada. "No need for a thank you," she nodded. Both were soldiers. They shared a wordless language, forged in fire, blood, and survival. Nothing needed explaining. As Malcolm stepped away from the gas station, a corridor opened, not out of fear, but respect. A few people stepped back, not to avoid him, to honor him. They had seen something rare, a man publicly humiliated, walking tall, without a word of bitterness. The live stream kept rolling, but now it wasn't recording confrontation, it was capturing a shift. The comment feed began to change. "He's not just a veteran, he's a damn leader. The way he walks away, that's power, that's dignity. This is how you shut the system down, by standing taller than it." A short clip, just a few seconds of Malcolm rubbing his wrist and nodding to the crowd, spread fast under a new hashtag, "Walk like Malcolm." Not because he said anything powerful, not because he fought back with logic, but because he stood silent and didn't bow. That night, the video hit over 1 million views. By morning, 10 million. Within 24 hours, from New York to Oakland, Dallas to Boston, people who had been treated like Malcolm posted their photos with a simple caption, "I was Malcolm." And Malcolm, he didn't rewatch the clip. He didn't post anything. After leaving the station, he drove to a beach near his home. Sitting on the hood of his truck, waves breaking in the distance, he closed his eyes. Not to forget, to remember. As he knew the fight wasn't over, it had just begun. And if the truth needed someone to lead, he was ready. He wouldn't shout, but the world would hear him. Once Malcolm had left the scene, the wind picked up over the gas station, like the air had been freed from an invisible pressure. But the truth didn't stop with a pair of unlocked cuffs or a trending hashtag. It spread like ink in water, and this time it reached the man who tried to bury Malcolm, Rick Halverson. That same night, as Malcolm's video went viral, a group of independent journalists and former investigators began digging through the local police department's internal records. Halverson, once a quiet name within the system, now burned like a fire in dry woods. What they found shocked the public. Malcolm wasn't the first black person Halverson had cuffed without cause. The records peeled back like onion layers. In 2018, Halverson arrested a black college student for looking suspicious while waiting outside his dorm. The case was dropped quickly for lack of evidence, but one line in the report stood out. "He looked at me like he had the right to exist on equal footing." In 2019, Halverson detained a 38-year-old black woman walking home from the store with her child. The official reason? Suspicious behavior. Area cameras recorded nothing out of the ordinary. The case was quietly closed. Then, in 2021, a 16-year-old boy was forced to sit on the curb for over 45 minutes for delayed compliance after Halverson ordered him to stop his bicycle. No photos, no formal report. The boy's mother filed a complaint. That complaint vanished in the archives. These cases, once forgotten, now resurfaced with fury when shown beside the image of Malcolm in handcuffs. A clear pattern emerged. Black, unarmed, non-aggressive, stopped for nothing more than being perceived as dangerous. The public didn't wait for direction. Community members began telling their stories. What was once whispered in kitchens, backyards, and church pews was now posted, filmed, and shared. New hashtags surfaced: Halverson pattern, the profile of prejudice, not just Malcolm. He wasn't the only one. Meanwhile, the department was forced to launch an internal investigation. At first, they stayed silent, but as the media pressed harder, a long-buried report leaked, frozen 3 years ago. It urged review of Deputy Halverson's conduct, noting he stopped people of color over 200% more often than the department average. The report had been ignored. No explanation, no action. Now, public outrage wasn't just aimed at Halverson. It targeted the entire system that protected, ignored, and enabled him. And in that outrage, Malcolm Reed's name rose again as the first to stand tall and force a town to face the truth. At a hastily arranged press conference, the mayor finally spoke. "We acknowledge failures in internal oversight, but the people didn't need acknowledgement. They needed action." That's when local civil rights groups stepped in, demanding a full reopening of every case Halverson touched. Malcolm made no statement afterward, declined every interview, but witnesses saw him visit the family of the teen, once been forced to sit on the curb. They talked in the backyard. No cameras, no recording, just healing, quiet, and real. As for Halverson, he still hadn't faced any consequences beyond public condemnation. Not yet. The night sea was calm. A gentle breeze from offshore carried the salt air to the wooden porch where Malcolm sat, his old t-shirt damp with the cold sweat of a sleepless night. In front of him sat a cup of coffee, untouched and already cold. His phone, face down on the table, wouldn't rest. It kept buzzing, short, sharp, persistent. At first, Malcolm chose silence. He thought he should be like other retired soldiers, walk through the storm, then disappear in quiet dignity. No press conferences, no statements, no interviews. He turned down offers from CNN, CBS, and even high-profile podcasters. He didn't want the spotlight. He didn't want to be a symbol. The truth, he believed, had already been revealed. Sometimes, silence was enough to end a storm. But the phone disagreed. The first message was from a former SEAL teammate. "We saw you standing there, silent like thunder. If you need anything, just say the word." The next was from a high school teacher. "I showed the video to my students. One cried, said, 'He looks like my dad.'" A black single mother wrote, "I was once detained carrying my child home from the market. No one filmed for me. But last night, you lived it for 1,000 of us." Malcolm flipped the phone, reading each message like unmarked reports, each line cut lightly across his weathered skin. Not bleeding, but stinging. That slow, dull pain made it impossible to keep convincing himself he was just a man who completed his duty. At first, he wanted to forgive, not because Halverson deserved it, but because Malcolm was tired of war, both the kind with guns and the kind without. Forgiveness seemed like the path to live out the rest of his life as a normal man. But then, things changed. System codes showed no panel volatility. At least 14 unlawful arrests linked to Deputy Halverson. A headline scrolled across his screen. The Malcolm Reed incident wasn't the first. A Washington Post article popped up on his Facebook feed. "Systemic racism within the city police. Unsealed records." Malcolm stared at the headlines, not with anger but with a twisting feeling in his chest, because he had considered forgiving a system that continued to wound others. Forgiveness in silence. Sometimes that's complicity. The next message wasn't text. It was a voice recording. He opened it, held the phone to his ear. A young soldier's voice came through, low and trembling with emotion. "That day, you didn't leave me behind. You pulled me out of the fire when the whole team had lost contact. I'm alive because of you. And now, seeing you stand there, in front of hundreds of eyes, against a system trying to shut you down, I realized something. I can't leave you behind. Not this time." Malcolm set the phone down. A gust of wind from the ocean swept in, making him shiver. But the chill in his body wasn't from the breeze. It was the cold of knowing he no longer had the right to stay silent. Silence could preserve personal dignity, but it wouldn't protect anyone else. It wouldn't stop the next black child from being stopped for biking without bowing his head, wouldn't stop the next mother from being cuffed in front of her kid. He stood, looked out to sea. No sigh, no wise words. Just a change in his gaze, the look of someone who doesn't want to fight, but won't turn away when the fight comes to his door. Behind every thank you message was an unspoken question. If you don't speak up, who will? Malcolm didn't answer with words. He opened his notes app and typed a single line, running for sheriff, not for revenge, but to end this. Sunday morning in Charleston was strangely serene. No clouds, no strong winds, just the soft, early light blanketing the backyard of Malcolm's small wooden house. There was no stage, no slogan banner, just a raw wood table, an old tripod, and a man who had stayed silent for too long. Malcolm stepped outside, wearing a white shirt with sleeves rolled to the elbows. No medals, no campaign signs, no hint that this was a political launch. His phone buzzed once. Live stream connected. He raised his hand and pressed the button. His first live stream ever. A simple move, but it made his fingers tremble. Even after leading teams into battle, after making life and death calls, this, speaking directly to a country under his real name, clenched something in his chest. He looked straight at the camera. No recap. No backstory, no mention of the video that had shaken the nation. He spoke, voice low and steady as stone. I'm Malcolm Reed. Last week, I was handcuffed at a gas station for one reason. I'm black. Before that, I was a Navy SEAL commander for 22 years. But that doesn't matter as much as this. I wasn't the only one that night. I was just the first who got live streamed. His eyes didn't blink or shift. He wasn't asking for sympathy. He wasn't provoking pity. What he delivered was clarity. Slow, quiet, undeniable. I'm not speaking out for revenge. I'm not stepping up to become a symbol, but I will not stay silent and let the system keep crushing people like me, like you. He paused, deliberately letting the words land, and then continued. Today I declare I'm running for sheriff of this county, not for revenge, but so no one else has to go through what I did. He said nothing more. No policy list, no rehearsed speech, no donation pitch. But it was that simplicity, the truth, told through his stance, his eyes, and a long-held silence that made tens of thousands watching across phones, laptops, and TVs go completely still. After that moment of silence came a flood of shares. Digital headlines appeared within 10 minutes. Former SEAL live streams, sheriff run after wrongful arrest. Malcolm Reed breaks silence, so no one else has to go through what I did. A new hashtag was born, Malcolm Speaks, and it spread fast from South Carolina to the rest of the nation. Clips from the live stream hit TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, especially the part where he said, "Not for revenge, but to end this." A comment from a former war correspondent sent chills down the internet. He's not speaking out of anger. He's speaking because silence now would be a crime. In Charleston, people talked in cafes, churches, and flea markets. Some posted Malcolm's photo in shop windows. A high school student drew his portrait with the caption, "Didn't need to shout to be heard, but this time he chose to speak." In the mayor's office, a staffer placed Malcolm's file on the desk with a note, over 10,000 signatures of support in 8 hours. And Malcolm, after ending the live stream, he put the phone away, left the grass, and walked back into the small kitchen where the kettle was boiling. He poured himself a cup of hot tea and sat in the wooden chair by the window. Looking out at the sea, he didn't smile, didn't speak. But his eyes, no longer resigned, now held one thing, resolve. That afternoon, the basketball court at Rose Hill was packed. There was no grand stage, no professional sound system, just cracked concrete, 2 rusty hoops, and a few wires haphazardly strung to connect a handheld speaker. But the energy was electric, like a campaign launch in the heart of a capital. The crowd came thick. Old folks, boys in worn team jerseys, single mothers with strollers, factory workers still in their uniform. They didn't come out of curiosity. They came because the name Malcolm Reed had become more than a name. It was now a statement. A man handcuffed on live stream who didn't scream or lash out, just stood tall. And now he declared he wouldn't let anyone else have to stand alone like that again. Handmade signs were raised. "We choose the man who once stayed silent but never bowed." White T-shirts bore the slogan, "Read for Sheriff, because justice has a spine." A boy's pencil sketch of Malcolm was pinned to a basketball pole with the caption, "You're the first real person I ever wanted to be." Malcolm stood at the edge of the court, holding a cheap mic patched together with electrical tape. He didn't need a loudspeaker. The crowd fell silent with just a wave of his hand. He began to speak. No script, no lofty rhetoric, just the voice of someone who had endured, who had held back, and now refused to let others suffer alone. "I'm not standing here alone," he said, scanning a sea of brown, white, yellow, and black faces, all watching him as if they stood with him. "I'm standing for those who were forced to bow their heads, who were told to stay quiet, to stay safe. I'm standing for those who never had anyone stand for them." Thunderous applause erupted. There were no rehearsed chants, but voices broke out from different corners. A woman shouted, "We've got your back." Someone else waved a handwritten sign, "Malcolm's not chasing power, he's reclaiming justice." Malcolm paused for a moment to compose himself. Though he was a soldier who'd faced battlefields, standing in front of people's raw hope was a different war, one no armor could shield. Gratitude and worry swelled inside him. He was never comfortable being praised. Now he felt himself lifted far too high. "They're counting on me," he thought. "I can't fall midway." The speech was short. He demanded that Halverson be held accountable. He didn't promise the moon, didn't paint grand futures, but it struck deep, because finally someone said aloud what people had carried inside for years but never dared speak publicly. As he stepped down from the court, the crowd didn't disperse. They surrounded him. A boy asked for an autograph. A young woman live-streamed through tears, whispering, "You gave me the courage to apply to the police academy." An elderly black woman with trembling hands from Parkinson's placed a hand on his shoulder and said slowly, "I've waited my whole life for someone like you." News of the campaign launch spread fast across the state. The press didn't ignore it. Even outlets focused only on mainstream politics ran headlines. One major paper printed, "Former SEAL wrongfully handcuffed now runs for sheriff and moves a city." A TV news editor commented, "We've covered loud candidates. This is the first time we've covered one who doesn't yell, but still commands attention." Social media exploded. The hashtag #MalcolmKongTronGee topped the state's trending list. His speech clips were paired with movie music, subtitled, shared like moral lessons. Human rights groups hosted forums inspired by his campaign. Some began calling him the calm black man who shook the system. One writer observed, "History doesn't always walk out of Parliament. Sometimes it rises from someone whose face was once shoved into the pavement and refused to stay down." As for Malcolm, that night, back home with his notifications silenced, he sat alone on the wooden porch, hands wrapped around a cup of hot tea. Light spilled softly from the house behind him. He didn't smile, but there was a glow in his eyes. Not from glory, but from something quieter, the sense that he was no longer alone in this fight. While Malcolm's campaign burned like fire through dry grass, Halverson, once convinced of his own invincibility, began to stumble like a man caught in the storm without cover. The media dug into his past, unlawful arrests, buried complaints, home camera footage showing him manhandling a young black boy for not standing still. Dozens who had stayed silent out of fear now stepped forward. They weren't afraid anymore, because Malcolm had gone first. Halverson appeared on local TV, pale, eyes hollow. He repeated the same refrain, "I was just doing my job. Don't let the media manipulate you." But no one believed him. Former supporters turned away. Colleagues who once slapped his back in the break room now quietly distanced themselves. A photo of him with the former police chief was removed from the department hallway. Halverson, the face of order, was now the symbol of a rotting system. When the disciplinary board announced it was reviewing permanent revocation of his law enforcement license, no one protested. People only sighed. That should have happened long ago. At the end of the evening news, the anchor read slowly. Halverson thought he was protected by the badge on his chest. What he didn't count on was the power of a community that stands together. When Halverson was officially arrested following an internal investigation and numerous verified complaints, every outlet ran the same headline. Charleston officer accused of abuse of power faces criminal charges. He was escorted from his home in civilian clothes, head bowed, silent. The crowd outside clapped, as if justice had finally answered roll call. But amidst the satisfaction, not everyone was pleased. In a small apartment on the city's west side, a man sat frozen in front of his screen, gripping the remote so tightly his knuckles went white. His bloodshot eyes locked on the image of Malcolm, waving to supporters at a massive campaign rally. The praise made his blood boil. Hero this, hero that. Do they even know what he's done? He clenched his jaw. A calloused fist slammed the table. They'll see. All of them will see. No one claps forever once they learn the truth. He wasn't part of the system, wasn't Halverson's friend, but something in him festered, a bitter, twisted rage waiting to ignite. From the old bookshelf, a file was pulled, an old photo, a yellowed, wartime clipping, a faded name tag, and one line, underlined in red, "The Commander, Malcolm Reed." The flickering fluorescent lights in the Charleston Police Department's records room cast a hazy glow over stacks of freshly unsealed files. Captain Maria Estrada sat at the desk, fingers interlocked, her gaze tight like a noose around a system long thought unbreakable. She hadn't expected that. Just from one internal investigation sparked by the Malcolm Reed case, dozens of old complaints linked to misconduct, abuse of power, and racial bias would emerge as deliberately overlooked from official processing. There they were, page by page, voices buried in ink, the voices of citizens who weren't believed, weren't heard, weren't protected. A 15-year-old boy stripped in public for suspicion of concealing an object. A single mother held for 36 hours with no charges. A truck driver left with broken ribs in a holding cell. And the signature on so many of these reports, tediously familiar. Rick Halverson. Estrada leaned back in her chair. Her chest rose and fell, not from shock. She had suspected it for some time, but because the scale of the fracture was larger than she'd imagined. This wasn't about one rogue officer. It was a web of silence, a culture, a chain of internal procedures, designed to blind the public and legitimize cruelty. The door opened softly. A staff member knocked lightly. "There's a woman here to see you. No appointment, but she says she can't wait any longer." Estrada frowned. "Name?" She didn't give one. Just said, "I know something about Malcolm Reed. Something not in any video." Estrada stood immediately. She straightened her uniform before walking out. Her heart beat slowly but heavily. The name Malcolm, recently elevated to a symbol of justice, resolve, and political momentum, now struck like a strange knock in the dark. The woman in the waiting room stood tall, mid-40s, denim jacket, hair in a tight bun, eyes shadowed like someone who hadn't slept. In her hand, a file envelope. She didn't sit, didn't apologize for the unannounced visit. Her eyes weren't emotional, but sharp as glass. Estrada approached, motioning for the officer in the hall to leave. With only the two of them in the room, she spoke first. "I'm Captain Estrada. You said you have information about Mr. Reed." The woman nodded, skipping pleasantries. "I'm not here to hurt anyone, but if you think exposing Halverson is the whole picture while ignoring what lies behind Malcolm, then you're not seeing the full game." She handed over the envelope. Estrada took it, opened it, and flipped through the contents in silence. Not official documents, copies of handwritten notes, a news clipping, a rough incident summary from years ago, shaky handwriting, smeared ink, but enough to chill the blood in Estrada's veins. "What is this?" she asked. her voice suddenly lower. The woman replied, "It's what no one's dared dig up. But I'm not like the rest. I served near him. I know he used to be an excellent commander. But I also know he wasn't just made of light." Estrada said nothing for a few more seconds. Her eyes skimmed the disordered notes, pausing on a line. Orders given during heightened tension. No independent witnesses. Civilian dead. No one dared report it. The woman continued, "I'm not here to tear him down. I'm here because if you really want to clean this system up, you can't pick and choose which truths are more comfortable to believe." That sentence seemed to freeze the air in the room. Estrada gripped the edge of the file slightly tighter. Her eyes were no longer just reading. She was listening to her gut. She had believed Malcolm was an honorable man, and he still was. But she also knew, in war, no one comes out spotless. And in politics, no one is above scrutiny. "What do you want me to do with this?" Estrada asked. Not harsh, not cold, just the voice of someone standing at a moral crossroads. The woman answered plainly, "I just want you to look at it and decide whether you're brave enough not to look away." Estrada nodded slowly, very slowly. The air around them felt thick. The internal investigation was no longer just about exposing Halverson. It had branched into something new, where even the symbols people rallied behind might carry secrets long kept in the dark. What was it? And did it truly involve Malcolm? But, as Estrada had once said, justice is not about satisfaction. It's about confrontation. The debate night took place in Charleston's community auditorium. Spotlights from the broadcast rigs swept across the stage, stripping away any pretense. 2 chairs sat exactly apart, marking the distance between 2 worlds. On one side, incumbent Sheriff Timothy Granger, stiff in a pressed suit, his expression trained for the camera. On the other, Malcolm Reed, white shirt, no tie, sitting upright, gaze steady like the ocean before a storm. The moderator began with questions on budget, reform, and crime prevention strategy. Granger answered with memorized figures, polished charts, and promises to maintain the progress we've achieved. Every word smooth, rehearsed. When it was Malcolm's turn, he didn't begin with rebuttals. He looked straight into the camera and spoke in a calm, low voice. "Before I talk about policy, I need to say one thing. I'm not perfect." The room fell silent. He went on, "I've given orders and operations that led to civilian casualties. I've stayed quiet because I thought silence would keep me safe. But I'm not here to clear my name. I'm here because justice doesn't need perfect people. It needs people who are willing to act." Applause broke out, unprompted, unrehearsed, natural, like breath finally released. Malcolm paused, then added, "The people don't need a sheriff who can quote crime stats. They need someone who won't turn away when they're treated unfairly. Someone who hurts when they see another person's child humiliated in the street." Granger sat stiffly, then tried to retake control with a measured tone. "I don't question Mr. Reed's past. But running a sheriff's department is complex. Military experience doesn't equal managing budgets, handling legal procedures, coordinating hundreds of personnel. This isn't a battlefield." Malcolm nodded slightly, unfazed. "You're right. It's not a battlefield, it's a community. But in the battlefield, I learned this. A wrong decision doesn't just cost you a job, it costs you lives. I don't have political experience, but I know what it means to be responsible for whether someone lives or dies." Social media lit up. Quotes from Malcolm began circulating. "I'm not here to clear my name. Justice doesn't need perfect people." Comments flooded in. "He's not dodging anything. That's a real one. Cops don't need another politician. They need someone like him." The moderator asked the final question, "If you could say only one sentence to voters, what would it be?" Malcolm didn't hesitate. "If your child was handcuffed in the street just for looking like someone else, if you've ever stayed silent because speaking out meant being silenced, let me be the one who won't look away." A pause. "I don't need to be perfect, I need to be right." The auditorium held its breath. Then came the second wave of applause. Louder, longer, more resolute. That night, Malcolm didn't promise miracles or dazzle with plans. Yet he left with thunderous applause and a room full of earned trust. At that moment, Malcolm Reed was not only the most compelling figure in the room, he was the most listened-to man in the city. File GE29IR/2011, marked Classified DES Internal Access Only by the U.S. Department of Defense, was created on September 12, 2011, following the conclusion of an operation codenamed Garden Echo, conducted on the eastern outskirts of Fallujah, Iraq. The mission's objective was to neutralize an armed training facility controlled by insurgent forces. According to the initial combat report, the operation was commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Malcolm Reed, who at the time led Joint Task Force 617, a unit composed of 14 Navy SEALs and 2 intelligence analysts. According to the attached map extract, the primary target was located at coordinates 33.3382 DEGN, 43.7745 DEGE, a site described as an abandoned zone converted into a training center. However, satellite imagery captured 48 hours prior to the strike showed the presence of civilians in the area, including women in traditional Islamic dress and children. Page 6 of the report records the official deployment order, issued at 2:17 a.m. local time on September 10, 2000, along with a note, operation to commence under conditions of satellite signal disruption, no high-altitude drone surveillance, entirely reliant on raw ground intel. The outcome, recorded at the end of the report, listed 3 civilian deaths: a boy named Yunus Rahmani, age 9, his mother, and an uncle. An additional 6 individuals were injured, 2 of them children. A survivor's testimony included in the file states, gunfire came from 3 directions. Without warning, no chance to evacuate. The final page bears a handwritten note. Target objective neutralized. Low-level armed group. Civilian losses within the combat risk threshold. No further investigation required. However, an attached appendix reveals that at least 2 logistics officers opposed the strike timing due to incomplete data and high risk of overlapping with civilian resettlement zones. Among them was Sergeant Catherine Doyle, who had submitted a memo on September 8, warning that the target may be the result of counterintelligence disinformation. Her memo received no reply. The leak didn't stop at the civilian deaths. It also detailed how Malcolm's unit withdrew from the site less than 20 minutes after the initial strike, leaving all damage assessments to local allied forces. A breach of post-engagement investigation protocols under SOP 135/3C of the Special Operations Command. What made the file even more sensitive was the presence of a provisional sign-off from a senior advisor, now a sitting member of Congress, giving the scandal political weight. And finally, in the recommendations section, the unnamed author had written in red ink, Reed didn't act like a reckless commander, but orders are still orders, and consequences can't be filed away as if they never happened. Within 48 hours of the file's leak, Malcolm Reed's campaign fell into full-blown crisis. News outlets ran image after image of the Garden Echo report. Headlines screamed, Malcolm Reed, hero or killer. Videos that once celebrated him as a symbol of integrity were deleted or flooded with divided comments. In the emergency meeting room at campaign headquarters, tension was razor-sharp. Advisors were split. One group pushed for a press conference to deny the allegations, attack the leak's credibility, and even accuse rivals of dirty tactics. The other urged silence. Wait for the Pentagon's verification. Let time cool the backlash. Anything you say now can be edited, a young strategist warned. If you strike back without proof, they'll label you a liar. Malcolm sat quietly by the window, hands clasped, staring at a yard scattered with fallen leaves. He didn't seem angry. He didn't demand retaliation. What filled his mind wasn't public opinion or poll numbers, but an old question resurfacing. Does truth still matter if people only believe what's easier to swallow? Major donors began to go quiet. Some delayed scheduled transfers. Others emailed requests for clarification on recent developments. In politics, waiting means retreating. His opponent didn't waste time. Press briefings were held daily, hammering at the image of the silent hero. Burke Galloway, the main challenger, declared, "This is no longer about war. This is about morality." He stayed silent when innocents died, and now he stays silent when the people deserve the truth. The public began to fracture. Those who once hailed Malcolm as a symbol now hesitated. Many still believed in him, but weren't sure they could say so out loud. A high school teacher wrote, "I haven't withdrawn my trust, but I'm not sure I can hold him up as an example for my students anymore." Malcolm understood. He knew every eye was on him, not waiting to cheer but to see if he would fall. The truth couldn't be erased, but it also wouldn't forgive itself. He didn't hide, but he hadn't spoken yet, because more than anyone, he understood. Words can't undo what's been lost, but silence, at the wrong time, is a knife to trust. The storm was now dead center, and Malcolm Reed, the man who once stood tall in handcuffs, now had to stand tall before his past. That morning, the people of Charleston didn't wake to alarm clocks. They woke to a tidal wave of news hitting phones, TVs, and social media feeds. Headlines flared red across major outlets. Who's the real hero? Malcolm Reed and the price of silence. He saved dozens of U.S. troops, but his order killed a child in Fallujah. The media had seemingly been given the green light to unleash everything: cameras, anchors, resources, on the name Malcolm, this time not to honor him. Others opposing networks deployed every tool they had. One primetime show recreated the Garden Echo operation in full: 3D maps, chopper paths, a cold voiceover layered over tense music. The host, dressed in a dark suit, stared into the camera. One order: 3 civilian lives were lost, including a 9-year-old boy. And now the man behind that order wants to be your sheriff. On a live-streamed community ethics debate, scholars, ex-military officials, journalists, and anti-war advocates took turns speaking. One said, "Reed doesn't deserve to symbolize justice because justice starts with clean hands." Another shot back, "But it was war. He saved dozens. Do we need someone good at saving Americans but killing foreign civilians? Then what do we need? Someone who's never done anything, just to be mistake-free?" Across coffee shops, barber shops, law offices, and bakeries, the air grew tense. Those who once held up "Walk Like Malcolm" signs now avoided saying his name. A college student who once praised him in class now posted on Reddit, "I still think he meant well, but now my classmates want the whole curriculum changed." A mother who once posed for a photo with him outside the gas station deleted the post and added, "I just don't want my kid targeted for a picture with someone controversial." Even within his campaign team, silence crept in. Some volunteers requested to step back temporarily. Some staff suggested halting media outreach for 3 days to manage the crisis. Calls from donors were postponed or rerouted to legal teams. Malcolm saw all of it. He wasn't angry. He didn't fall apart. But he understood this: trust isn't built on achievements. It's built on emotions. And emotions are more fragile than glass. He sat alone in a small office, the window slightly open, letting in a sliver of morning light. On the desk, copies of the Garden Echo file, post-it notes from advisors, public opinion reports, and a cup of cold coffee. What lay in front of him wasn't a political battlefield. It was a single, piercing question that had haunted him since day one of the campaign. Am I still the man they need? In his mind, a voice from the past echoed, the voice of a fallen teammate. One day, if they ask why you gave the order, don't justify it. Just tell them the truth. They don't need reasons. They need to see you're still human. Malcolm knew, to the public, he was no longer just a veteran. He had become a symbol, and now that very symbol was being dissected, stripped down, exposed like a wound never fully healed. He also understood something else. Heroes don't get to choose when they fall, but they can choose how they rise. Online, The atmosphere thickened like poison smoke. The name Malcolm Reed wasn't confined to news cycles anymore. It had become kindling on Twitter, TikTok, Facebook, and Reddit. Once a capitalized icon, now shredded by cruel, racist, unfiltered comments. Black fraud pretending to be a hero, using the BLM wave to get famous. A slick soldier dodging justice, now trying to tell us what's right. These appeared beneath posts that once supported him, now rewritten with bitterness. One user who had once hashtagged Justice for Malcolm deleted the post and re-uploaded it with, "Thought he was honest. Turns out he's slicker than a politician." What cut deepest? Many of these people had shaken his hand at the basketball court, clapped him on the back at town halls. But now that he was no longer their perfect hero, his skin color had become an open reason to hate. They no longer said, "Sheriff candidate Malcolm Reed." They called him, "That black guy Malcolm." No disguise, no pretense, as if they'd just been waiting for an excuse to rip off the civilized mask society had forced them to wear. On a right-wing forum, a top post was pinned for 48 hours. "Reed proves not every black man is a hero." The top one replied, "We never believed he was. We just kept quiet when everyone else was cheering. Now, we don't have to pretend anymore." These weren't criticisms. They were raw, unfiltered prejudice, spreading faster than any speech could fight back. Of course, there were voices defending him. One Twitter user wrote, "If someone's lived through war, stayed silent through injustice, and finally stood up, he deserves respect, not crucifixion for being imperfect." An older white woman reposted a video of Malcolm with the caption, "I still trust that man more than any politician who's ever shook my hand at City Hall." But they were few, and they knew it. Positive comments were buried beneath avalanches of outrage. Rational voices were branded as naive, or apologists for a killer, or simply woke frauds. In the chaos of online opinion, trust was the first casualty, especially trust placed in a man who had once been handcuffed and had once given wartime orders. Malcolm read it all, not because he wanted pity, but because he knew to move forward he had to look reality in the face. And when he stared into the unfiltered, unashamed racism, comments that weren't deleted, hidden, or even disguised, he understood. People don't fall because of their past mistakes. They fall when the world around them never truly wanted them to rise in the first place. He had faced death, had given orders in the dark, not knowing what waited behind each gate, had seen teammates fall because of him. But no battlefield had left him as hollow, as sitting there alone, watching people who once called him hope turn away with a click and a comment, "I was wrong to trust him." And for the first time since it all began, Malcolm didn't feel alone because of his past. He felt alone because the present was too raw to hide the pain. He realized one more truth. A part of society never stopped being racist. They just got better at hiding it. They said they respected him because society expected them to. But when things got uncomfortable, their first attack was always his skin color. That's what they used to tear him down. This time, he would not stay quiet. This time, he would speak, and he would make them look at the truth they'd spent decades avoiding. That morning, at the public sports field in southern Charleston, a small wooden platform was hastily assembled, with rows of folding chairs arranged in a semicircle. There were no campaign posters, no slogans, just a single sign hanging in the center. "I will answer, not avoid." Malcolm arrived early. He personally tested the microphone, checked the sound, and then stepped back to take in the space. His team had urged him to cancel the event or move it somewhere more controlled, but he simply said, "I'm not afraid of questions, and I shouldn't be afraid of those who once believed in me." As the hour approached, the field began to fill, but it wasn't the supportive atmosphere of earlier events. The crowd today was mixed and simmering. Some came to listen, some came to shout. Others just stood filming, faces blank like spectators at a public trial. Murmurs rose as Malcolm stepped onto the platform. There was no applause, no one stood. Their eyes brimmed with suspicion, anger, waiting for one wrong word to rip it all apart. Malcolm took the mic. His voice was low and steady. He opened with a line that didn't try to please. "I didn't come here to beg forgiveness. I came because I believe you deserve to hear the truth. From me, directly, not clipped, not filtered." The crowd quieted for a beat. He spoke about Operation Garden Echo, without dodging. He described the night of September 9, the order issued under compromised signals, all intelligence pointing to an armed training camp. He stated plainly, "I signed the order, and that order led to the deaths of 3 civilians, including a child." A voice snapped from the left row. "You bastard!" Another shouted, louder, "War criminal!" A water bottle flew toward the stage, struck his foot and rolled away. Malcolm didn't flinch. He stood firm, eyes forward. "If that mistake makes you lose trust in me, I understand. If you can't forgive, I understand that too. But I will not lie to win. I will never use someone else's blood as a stepping stone." The crowd erupted, louder and more vicious this time. Crude insults, unfiltered racial slurs were screamed out as if no one cared to hide anymore. A middle-aged man pressed against the barrier, face red with rage. "You think you're noble? After killing a child?" A young man hurled a flyer onto the stage. It bore the photo of Eunice, the boy killed in that operation, with the scrawled words, "I hope my kid never meets a cop like you." Malcolm stepped back half a pace, not out of fear, but because he knew he couldn't go on. Not out of weakness, but because the anger had drowned out the possibility of being heard. One of his advisors rushed up and whispered, "We need to leave. It's not safe." Malcolm nodded. He lowered the mic and said one final line, "Thank you for coming. Whether you believe me or not, I still believe I had to tell the truth." As he walked off the field, there were no claps. No one stopped him. Dozens of phones stayed raised, but this time they weren't capturing a symbol. They were refracting the light, turning him into a figure for the public's fury. The atmosphere was still thick with tension as Malcolm stepped off the stage. Insults echoed from the back rows. Objects rolled around his feet. Despite the intervention of his assistant, the dialogue event had ended in chaos. Malcolm's eyes were tired, but he didn't look away. He had said what he believed, and he was attacked for it. Just as he turned to walk inside, a calm but clear voice called out behind him, "Mr. Reed." For a moment, everything fell still. A Middle Eastern woman in her 30s, wearing a black hijab, slim but with piercing, deep-set eyes, stepped forward. She didn't shout or accuse. She simply walked slowly to the nearly empty podium Malcolm had just left. The guards exchanged glances, preparing to stop her, but she raised a hand and said quietly that she wasn't there to cause trouble, only to seek answers. Malcolm turned back. Their eyes met, and he stopped. The woman introduced herself as Lamia Ratmani, from Iraq. Her voice didn't tremble, but there was a raw edge in it, the kind born of long-suppressed pain. Some cameras were still recording. The live stream hadn't been fully cut. She continued. She was the mother of Eunice, a 9-year-old boy who died during Operation Garden Echo in 2011. The name struck Malcolm like a blow to the chest. He didn't retreat, but his fingers, loosely clasped, curled into a tense grip. The surrounding noise seemed to fade, leaving only the woman's voice as she stood in front of him, like someone standing before a grave, still bare. She asked what he had seen, why no one saved her son, why no one saved her son, why the strike order was given in the middle of the night, and why her son's body had been returned in a cloth bag so damaged that his face was unrecognizable. Malcolm said nothing, not because he had no answer, but because he knew no words could suffice. There was nothing he could say that would explain to a mother why her child died in a bombing, and nothing could soften a question he had asked himself for over a decade. Lamia looked directly into his eyes. She said she had waited for someone from his side to return and apologize. She had once believed that if he, as a commander, had any decency, he would say something to those left behind. Her voice lowered, yet it carried more force than any shout. No one ever came until she saw him on TV, praised as a man of courage, a symbol of justice, a hope for the American people. She confessed that she couldn't bear it, couldn't watch the man who signed the order that killed her son being called a symbol. Malcolm looked at her, still silent, but his eyes held the heavy gray light of someone who would not deny or deflect, only carry the full weight of the accusation. Lamia then pulled out an old envelope from her bag. It was a copy of documents she had sent to an old journalist friend who helped her bring the case into public view. She explained it wasn't because she wanted Malcolm imprisoned or dead like her son. She just wanted him to feel pain, to feel, even a little, what she had felt, so he could understand. Tears welled in her eyes, though she didn't let them fall. She admitted she didn't know if she should feel guilty. She knew what would happen. Malcolm would lose everything. But if she didn't act, no one would remember Hughes. Silence followed. A breeze stirred dry leaves. A young cameraman in the back was crying. An older woman had her hands clasped in a quiet prayer. Finally, Malcolm spoke. His voice was hoarse. He said he remembered the boy's name, had remembered it for 12 years. Not a day had passed without him thinking about that order. He said he wasn't asking for forgiveness. He had no right to, but he would carry the pain because he deserved to. The two locked eyes, one a mother, the other a commander. There was no more anger, no politics. Only the one truth remained that day, a pain that could not be erased, but at least someone was finally willing to bear it. Malcolm didn't deny anything. He looked straight at Lamia, not avoiding her gaze, not justifying himself. His voice, heavy and worn, carried no tremble, just the exhaustion of someone with nothing left to hide. He said he wasn't there to ask for forgiveness and didn't dare to hope for it. It wasn't a defense, it was a release, not of responsibility, but of pretense. A confession from a man who sought no absolution, only to stop running from what he had done. Lamia stood still. Her shoulders began to tremble. Then the tears finally broke. Not loud or dramatic, but the kind that comes from being bottled up too long. Tears not shed for a night, but for 12 years of being denied the right to grieve fully. Through sobs, she recalled the night. They were sleeping. Her son had his head resting on her arm. When the first explosion hit, all she felt was fear. Then, when she came to, the house was gone, turned to dust, and her hand could no longer touch anything. Malcolm lowered his head. The courtyard was silent but for the wind. A few people had returned after hearing what was happening. They stood at the edges, not interfering, quietly witnessing a trial without a judge. Lamia said she had lived 12 years dreaming of seeing her son run back from the fields. Every time she saw Malcolm on TV talking about justice and belief, she didn't feel hatred, but she felt suffocated. She wanted to scream. She wanted someone to know that before there was Malcolm of America, there was her, Hughes. She had dug through records, every document, every campaign code. She wasn't sure she'd find anything. But when his name came up, she couldn't stay silent. She had to bring it to light, not for revenge, but so that he would have to face it, not in a court of law, but in front of her. Malcolm didn't respond immediately. He stepped forward, not too close, but close enough that their eyes could meet without the space of social formality. He said he knew the boy's name, had read the reports, and heard the stories from fellow soldiers about scraps of fabric and tiny shoes among the rubble. And since that day, he couldn't look at children's shoes without feeling pain. Lamia raised a trembling hand to her mouth, then lowered it again. Her voice was breaking. She said she didn't want to bring him down or see him imprisoned. She just wanted him to feel what she had felt, just a fraction of the hole in her chest since that day. Then she stepped back, signaling the end of her words. Around them, silence held. A soft wind carried the scent of dry grass, dust, and uneven heartbeats from those bearing witness. Malcolm looked at her. He said nothing more, made no promises, but in his eyes was something real, not just grief, but the burden he was willing to share, a silent solidarity with a mother he couldn't save, but whose loss he could shoulder. There was no embrace, no handshake, no cinematic reconciliation, only two people, once on opposite sides, standing together in a silent storm. And in that silence, perhaps, they gave each other the only kindness left, when no words could weigh more than the truth that had already happened. In the distance, a live stream viewer typed the first caption, "This isn't politics. This is human. The broadcast was scheduled for 7:00 p.m., prime time for local television, and unexpectedly went nationwide. There was no dramatic introduction. It began with a simple image: Malcolm Reed, seated at a wooden table, no suit, no armor, just a white shirt with sleeves rolled up, a serious face, and his eyes steady on the camera. On the table lay a neatly stacked set of declassified documents marked 2011 Garden Echo Declassified by Citizen Request 713. He didn't open with a defense. There was no emotional framing. Instead, Malcolm spoke with the cold precision of someone who had waited too long for the truth to be told properly. He displayed a satellite image from 72 hours before the operation. Blurry, infrared figures. No high-altitude drones. No macro-level visibility. He pointed to a corner of the frame where radar data had been disrupted by electromagnetic interference. That, he said, was the moment they lost signal. The base had just 14 minutes to make a decision. He walked viewers through excerpts from mission logs, date, time, movement maps, weather conditions on the night of September 9th, presented not theatrically but like a briefing room report. Then came an audio clip from squad comms. Malcolm's voice, urgent but controlled, saying, "I'm not sure this is a clean target, but if we don't move, we lose the entire left flank. Final confirmation, then limit the strike." The room behind every screen fell still. What followed was more unexpected. A second recording played. A woman's voice, unsteady but firm. It was Sergeant Catherine Doyle, once cited as the mission's lone dissenter. Her voice was broadcast to the entire country. She said she still believed the strike shouldn't have happened, and she had opposed it at the time. But then she added that if Malcolm hadn't given the order, she and 11 others might not be alive. He hadn't acted blindly, she said. He had chosen lives over hesitation under fire. There was no dramatic arc, no one shouting, "He's innocent." The evidence came slow, deliberate, like peeling back a storm buried under 14 years of silence. What it revealed wasn't just a defense, it was context. Malcolm didn't cry, he didn't plead, he ended with one sentence. If the public believed he had been wrong to prioritize the lives of his team over unconfirmed intel, he said he wouldn't argue. But he had never given that order out of cruelty. He gave it because if he hadn't, none of them would have lived to tell the story. The reaction that followed wasn't a tidal wave of outrage, it was something quieter, a shift. On political forums, a post titled "Garden Echo, the Full Picture" climbed into trending lists. On Twitter, the hashtag #ReadTruth returned. Several journalists who had once criticized Malcolm publicly admitted they hadn't seen the full picture. Some apologized. One wrote, "I judged a shadow. I didn't see the whole man." Online searches for Garden Echo surged by 800% overnight. Reddit threads and TikTok breakdowns multiplied. The consensus wasn't that Malcolm had been flawless, but that his actions reflected something deeper: the weight of leadership, the burden of silence, the cost of keeping others alive. Malcolm didn't exit the screen to applause, but when he walked away, he did so with something stronger than validation, clarity, and within 12 hours, another voice joined his. A 6-minute video appeared online. It wasn't posted by his campaign or shared by any major outlet, just a single handheld clip. The lighting flickered, the audio wavered, but the voice in it cut through more clearly than any polished broadcast could. A man in his 30s, short hair, muscular build, a faint scar running from jaw to neck, sat in a bare room with a worn American flag draped behind him. His name was Patrick Voss. He introduced himself plainly, a former front-run recon soldier in Garden Echo 2011. Patrick said no one had asked him to speak and he wasn't trying to salvage anyone's reputation. He spoke because silence, to him, now felt like cowardice. He described how, during the operation, he had been the last one trapped, location data jammed, out of ammo, bleeding behind broken cement. Only one man knew he was still alive: Malcolm Reed. He paused before saying that Reed, a commanding officer, had gone against protocol and come back for him. Crawling through rubble under fire, Reed had pulled him out. And when the team had just 14 seconds to evacuate before an airstrike, Reed had been the last one out. Patrick's voice trembled, but he didn't falter. He said if anyone claimed Reed acted recklessly, arrogantly, or with indifference to life, he would be the first to stand up and say they were wrong. Because without Reed, he said, he wouldn't be alive to say anything at all. The video ended with a black and white photo, their SEAL team standing beneath a U.S. flag in Iraq, Reed's hand resting on Patrick's shoulder. Within an hour, the clip exploded across social media. The hashtag Truth for Reed surged. People who had once called for Malcolm's defeat were now reposting the video, with captions like, "I'm listening now," or "I was wrong." One veteran journalist wrote that Patrick hadn't given a speech, he had survived to tell the truth. And truth, the journalist said, outweighs any presumption. A major news network aired a correction, admitting that their earlier coverage had ignored critical life-or-death contexts. At a high school, a history teacher played Patrick's video and said, "Learn to see the difference between failure and courage. A man who owns even his mistakes, that's someone worth trusting." At a church sermon, a pastor reminded his congregation that many good people had been condemned for their darkest moments, but truth often lived in the scars they were too humble to reveal. In Malcolm's campaign office, no one spoke as the view count climbed into the millions. A young volunteer whispered, "We couldn't buy that with $1 million ad." A strategist, still staring at the screen, simply said, "We didn't save him. The man he saved came back and saved him." Malcolm posted nothing. He said nothing. He sat quietly at his desk and reopened an old photo of his SEAL team. His hand rested on Patrick's face in the image. It wasn't sentiment. It was the first time he truly knew. Truth, when told at the right time, can stand against any storm. Monday night, 7:30 p.m., local station WCHS Channel 7 aired a special segment, Voters' View, Charleston Sheriff Election 2026. The most anticipated portion was the latest poll results conducted by independent firm Conduct Pulse, sampling over 1,200 voters across Charleston County. Veteran journalist Jenna Morales, known for her sharp political analysis and voice like cold steel, led the broadcast. Against a sleek graphic display and soft electronic music, Morales revealed the updated numbers as of 5 p.m. Burke Galloway, the conservative candidate, led with 42% support. Malcolm Reed followed with 28%, and third-place contender, retired Sheriff Raymond Ray McDougal, held 19%. The remaining 11% were undecided or refused to answer. A headline rolled across the bottom of the screen. Malcolm Reed drops nearly 20 points in 2 weeks. Phenomenon or final chapter? Morales didn't flinch from the hard question. With an expression of steady neutrality, she commented, "We've never seen a candidate fall this sharply in the final stretch. From 46% to 28%, that's not fluctuation. That's a crisis." She turned to political analyst Doug Renshaw, who nodded and added, "Since the Garden Echo file leak, Reed lost control of his own narrative. Voters don't see a hero anymore. They see a question mark. And when people feel uncertain, they play it safe." Following the data breakdown, the segment shifted to a mini-documentary, collecting street-level interviews from Charles E. Brown High School, Ladson West, and Sparkstone Central Bus Depot. Reactions were mixed. A middle-aged white woman in Garden Park said quickly, "I really liked him, honestly. But that file, he hid it for so long and didn't even apologize? I just don't know anymore." At a bus stop, an elderly black man shook his head. "I heard Malcolm speak in church last year. Strong man. But if even he can be taken down, who's left to stand in the storm?" Morales moved on to the trend charts. The red line for Galloway had risen steadily for a month. Malcolm's blue line spiked, dipped, then plunged post-leak point. Meanwhile, the number of undecided voters grew, not a sign of lost belief, but of frozen trust. Even Malcolm's most loyal supporter groups began to waver. On the Justice for Charleston community Facebook page, a once-pinned post backing him had been edited with a note, We're reassessing. Please be respectful in the comments. A TikTok clip went viral showing Malcolm in a town hall captioned, "My heart wants to believe, my mind won't let me." Still, the report wasn't all bleak. Morales shifted gracefully to a segment called Signs of Resolve, noting a small but unwavering group that continued to stand by Reed. A middle-aged man told reporters, "He's not perfect, but he's real. I'd rather vote for truth than performance." Online, a small but steady hashtag appeared, "Still with Reed." To close the program, Morales stared directly into the camera. Voice firm, "If Charleston's history teaches us anything, it's this. Trust can be rebuilt, but only if someone's willing to hold their ground. Malcolm Reed is no longer leading this race, but he's still the one with a story people can't ignore, whether they agree with him or not." The screen faded to the Channel 7 logo. Outside, TVs were being turned off, but the conversation had only deepened. Malcolm hadn't disappeared. He was facing something clearer than ever. The cost of truth is loss before it can become change. Back in the campaign's war room, time felt suspended. The wall clock seemed to have stopped ticking. No one spoke. Fluorescent lighting cast a pale wash over everyone's faces, most with eyes down, slouched over laptops, brows furrowed. On the projector screen, Galloway's red poll line held firm at the top. Malcolm's blue line had dropped below the viability threshold. To the right, a fresh data board showed voter sentiment with two harsh, bold words, "Not trustworthy." The communications director spoke first, voice low but rigid. "We need a counter-campaign. Fast. I have a list of 3 journalists Galloway tried to silence. We leak something about his wife." Another advisor cut in, "Or we remix the gas station video, add music, slow motion, community testimonials, hit the emotions." People forget fast, but they remember what moves them. In the corner, a young strategist, Georgetown trained, pitched softer tactics, blanket YouTube ads, reframe Reed as a good neighbor, not a SEAL, no war, no past, just humanity. Every suggestion layered more noise into the room. No one asked Malcolm. He was the centerpiece, yet treated like a product needing a rebrand. The room felt like an operating theater trying to revive someone who was still breathing. Malcolm hadn't said a word. Fingers interlocked, eyes fixed on the window, watching the gray dusk settle over an empty street. When everyone had finished talking, he finally spoke, quiet, but loud enough to still the room. Now, a few heads turned, confused. Malcolm repeated it, slower, firmer. "No, we're not doing that." He stood and walked to the screen, stared at the poll graph without blinking. "I don't need to win with words. I just need to be right in action." A soft sigh escaped someone. The communications lead almost pleaded. "But if we do nothing, you'll lose." Malcolm turned, his voice low but unshakable. "If I have to win by twisting the truth, I already lost." The room fell silent, the kind of silence that forces people to look inward. A young volunteer by the window sat up straighter. An older advisor, silver-haired with 3 past Senate campaigns behind him, gave a faint nod. Not everyone spoke, not everyone agreed, but in that moment, the air wasn't frozen with fear anymore. It carried clarity and the unsettling awareness that not every path to victory deserves to be taken. Malcolm returned to his seat, his voice softer now. "We might lose. I can live with that. But if we win by abandoning the truth, by betraying why I entered this race, then the entire community loses." People left the room slower than usual that night. The tension was still there, but mixed now with something else. A quiet reckoning. Each person left carrying a personal question. Do I want to win, or do I want to walk with someone who tells the truth no matter where it leads? Malcolm stayed back. He walked over to the Charleston County map pinned to the wall, neighborhoods marked in colored ink. His hand paused over a spot by the coast, the gas station, where it all began. Maybe it would also end there. But either way, he would keep walking, not with bait, but with truth. Early that morning, Charleston was still wrapped in mist. Street lights hadn't shut off, and yet the lines had already begun forming outside polling sites. Charleston High School, Southside Community Center, Westover Community Station. The early winter chill made people huddle into their coats, but their hands held tight to voter guides, ID cards, or phones with polling locations pulled up. Some arrived as early as 4:30 a.m., lining up before poll workers even got there. No one said much. They just stood, quiet. At each site, amid the notices about voting procedures, there was a single A4 sheet taped with clear plastic. It was a black and white still from a live stream nearly a year ago. A black man in a grease-stained shirt, hands cuffed behind his back, standing under the harsh neon lights of a gas station. His eyes looked straight into the camera. No fear, no shame, just presence. Below the image, a thin line of text cut straight through the chest of anyone who read it. He didn't scream. He didn't run. No one knew who printed it. No one saw who put it up, but no one took it down. WCHS Channel 7 reporters were scattered across polling locations. Their cameras caught every kind of face: old, young, white, black, elderly women with canes, young girls in hoodies that read "Justice Never Sleeps." Asked why he showed up early, a young voter named Isaiah, a sophomore history major, said, "I don't know if he did everything right, but I know he's real. And today I want my vote to say that." At Southside, a white woman in her 50s stood with tears welling in her eyes, staring at the old image. She didn't speak, just pulled out her phone and took a picture. When a reporter asked if she knew Malcolm Reed, she whispered, "I used to support Galloway, but last night I re-watched the Garden Echo video, and then I watched him say, 'I don't need to win with words. I need to be right in what I do.' I couldn't sleep, so I came here." Live broadcasts aired from polling stations all day. One commentator noted, "We're seeing triple the turnout compared to the last midterms. But more than that, it's the expression on voters' faces. This doesn't feel like a regular election. It feels more like an inner reckoning between reason, belief, and forgiveness." Online, photos of long lines spread like wildfire. One taken at Charleston High was shared over 20,000 times in 3 hours, with the caption, "We're not voting for a person. We're voting to hold onto something money can't buy." Authenticity. One standout comment read, "I don't care if he wins anymore, but if we don't vote for him, no one will ever dare to stand up again." At Riverside Community Center, a group of young people raised a sign, "He's not perfect. That's why we trust him." A woman in a blue sweater smiled faintly nearby. She said nothing, but once they left, she stepped toward the ballot desk, her hand trembling, but her eyes bright. In the WCHS newsroom, the senior correspondents and editors watched turnout data roll in. One muttered, "Something's shifting." One voter, one ballot at a time, pushing back against the collapse of trust. No one knew what the final result would be, but it was clear today's atmosphere wasn't built from speeches. It came from a single, silent image and the memory of a man who didn't flinch when the world tried to pull him under. Election day in Charleston wasn't loud. No parades, no honking cars, no booming speeches over megaphones. Instead, quiet waves rippled through street corners, riverside markets, barber shops on 8th Avenue. Conversations were hushed, like no one wanted to jolt something fragile, holding everything in place. At a barber shop, Byron, now in his 50s, overheard a customer say, "I know he made mistakes, but he didn't run." His friend paused, then replied, "Yeah, better than smiling and asking for votes like nothing happened." Across the room, a young mother holding her baby shook her head. "I don't know who I'm voting for, but I do know someone out there today is fighting harder with their conscience than with the ballot." At a cafe on South Main, Mr. Wallace, an aging veteran, sat with his coffee, staring out the window. A student asked who he'd vote for. He didn't answer at first. Then, raspy, he said, "He hurt me. I felt betrayed. He kept too much hidden. But then I watched that handcuff video again. Saw him on stage taking the blame, not asking for pity, just saying, 'I take responsibility.' I've never seen anyone stand that steady under fire." No one talked about right or wrong anymore. That line, for many, had blurred. What people whispered now was deeper. Who would keep their word? Who wouldn't turn their race into a slogan or pain into campaign fuel? Who would walk the whole path knowing it could lead to defeat? At a small riverside market, a vegetable vendor wiped her brow when asked about her vote. She smiled sadly. I thought Malcolm was a hero. Then I panicked, thought I trusted wrong, but then I saw how he didn't deflect, didn't name a scapegoat, and I thought, if my child messed up, I'd want him to take responsibility like that. Churches were quieter than usual, but the private prayer benches were full. People sat still, not reading scripture, just silently asking for something unspoken, clarity or peace after casting their vote. Online, the commentary had slowed. No more fury, no mass forgiveness, just longer, quieter posts. I've been thinking about the difference between accepting and endorsing. No one comes out of war clean, but few walk into politics still carrying the truth. One elementary teacher wrote, I don't know if my students will remember Malcolm's name, but I know they're watching the adults, and I want them to see we can listen without shouting to be right. That afternoon, a local radio station opened the lines. One call from North Charleston silenced the host. My father didn't come back from Garden Echo. I used to hate Malcolm Reed, but now I realize I don't want anyone else to die to make up for it. I don't know how this ends, but today I let go of something I've carried too long. In that moment, the ballot, just paper, became a mirror into the voter's soul. Not everyone voted for Malcolm, but many showed up because he forced them to ask, if I were him, would I have stood still? Evening fell. The ballots were cast. No one knew the result, but Charleston was still, unnervingly so, as if the city itself held its breath, waiting to see what remained when faith was tested to its limits. The sky darkened into a cold gray as the city tuned in. Cafes dimmed their lights, bars fell quiet. All TVs flicked to one station, South Carolina Election Night Live. Broadcast live from the final counting center in Columbia, the last place with unopened ballots. Each time the camera panned through the glass doors, viewers saw white-gloved workers carefully lifting thermal bags, handling sealed envelopes in near silence. The only sounds were the counting machines and a woman's calm voice. Batch 51, Charleston County, control code 2249B, valid. At Malcolm Reed's campaign headquarters, the lights were lowered. Everyone sat close, silent. A volunteer clutched prayer beads. The comms director stood at the whiteboard, scribbling new numbers as they appeared. A red banner flashed across the screen. 95% of statewide ballots counted. Margin, 0.8%, no clear lead. Outside the HQ, a crowd gathered on the sidewalk. No chants, no banners, just eyes fixed on a makeshift outdoor screen. A little boy whispered, "Is it almost Mr. Malcolm's turn?" In the studio, lights dimmed over anchor Franklin DeWitt, a veteran broadcaster. He had called 3 elections before, but tonight, even his voice trembled. We've just learned only one precinct remains, Charleston's District 7B, with nearly 4,000 voters. That's the area where Mr. Reed held his silent town hall after the Garden Echo fallout. The tension was suffocating. Cameras zoomed in on every face, a young woman biting her nails, an old man pressing his lips together, eyes fixed on the screen. In the background, Batch 52, valid. On WCRX radio, the host paused mid-sentence to breathe. If those 4,000 votes lean Reed, everything changes. The live map pulsed. A red field narrowed. A blue dot inched toward the center. Then a message appeared, slicing through the weight like a blade. 100% of ballots counted. Final results in 60 seconds. 1 minute, a minute that held the weight of the entire campaign. A minute heavier than every insult Malcolm had absorbed, every silent interview he endured. A minute in which eyes across churches, kitchens, guard posts, hospital beds, locked onto a single screen. No one breathed. No one looked away. And then the number appeared. When the giant screen in Charleston's Central Square lit up with the words Malcolm Reed, 51.2% of the total vote, there was no eruption of cheers like in most election wins. No victory music played, no confetti burst into the air. Everything in that first moment simply went still, as if the entire city had just exhaled after holding its breath through a storm too long contained. The margin of over 6,000 votes between Malcolm and Burke Galloway, the opponent considered unbeatable just 3 weeks earlier, was more than a number. It was a declaration from a community that had deliberated, wrestled with doubt, and weighed their conscience daily. An almost impossible comeback now appeared clearly on every news outlet, every election app, every final results board across the state. On King Street, there was no dancing, but people stepped out, one by one, then in small groups, ink-stained fingers from polling stations still visible. They stood, met each other's eyes, and said nothing. An elderly man caught the gaze of a young woman walking out of church. He nodded. She nodded back, a nod that said, "We chose." At Riley Park, a young mother sat with her child on a bench, crying openly. When asked why, she didn't respond at first. She simply pointed to the big screen with Malcolm's name. Then she whispered, "I once told my son not to believe in ideals, but today I take that back." At a Northeast shopping district, supermarket staff posted a handwritten sign behind the counter. "We voted for faith, not perfection." A middle-aged customer read it, put down his bag of groceries, and took the cashier's hand. "Thank you for not walking away." Local station SC Channel ran a special report at 9:10 p.m., just 3 minutes after the final count was confirmed. The anchor didn't speak with excitement. His voice lowered, almost a whisper. "We may be witnessing a rare moment of change, where victory doesn't come from the hardest hit, but from surviving everything that should have broken a man." The hashtag "We Voted with Faith" shot to the top of Twitter statewide in under 20 minutes. Accounts that had been silent before the election started resharing old photos. Malcolm in handcuffs, Malcolm speaking to crowds, Malcolm walking beside a white boy in the afternoon sun, all now captioned like quiet confessions. "I once doubted, but I came back. I was afraid of being wrong, but this time I chose courage." No one called it a landslide. People called it a win of conscience. Not so much, "Malcolm Reed has won," but "we didn't let our doubt kill our own belief." A white woman, an elementary school teacher, told WCRX radio, "This isn't the victory of one man. It's the victory of everyone who hesitated but didn't run, who were hurt but still chose truth." South of the city, the youth group behind the "He Didn't Run" campaign gathered by the riverbank near Ashley. No live stream, no selfies. They simply watched the water, until one of them said quietly, "No one's forced to forgive, but he made people brave enough to forgive themselves." Inside the campaign office, now quieter, Malcolm didn't sit in the leader's chair. He stood in the back of the room, beneath dim lights, listening to others pat each other's backs without saying a word. Someone turned, touched his shoulder, and simply said, "We did it." He nodded. Outside, the bells of First Baptist Church rang 3 times, not to celebrate, but to remind. Some victories need no fireworks, just the knowledge that you didn't lose the most important thing on the way, yourself. That night, the outdoor stage built hastily in Charleston's Central Square had no flashing lights, no fireworks overhead, no booming victory music. Even as thousands gathered, the air stayed quiet. They stood shoulder to shoulder, not pushing, no banners, no flags waving. A light breeze rustled the handmade signs bearing Malcolm's name in marker. Then he appeared. Malcolm Reed stepped out from behind the curtain, not in the polished suit of a newly elected politician, but in the plain white shirt that had come to define his journey. No badge, no tie, just a straight posture, a steady gaze, and hands clasped like someone holding on to something bigger than results. He didn't raise his hands like politicians do. He didn't start with, "We won." He didn't call for cheers. Instead, he bowed his head, slowly, with weight, before stepping to the mic. His voice carried calm over the silent crowd. No loudspeakers, no chants, just the clear sound of a man who had once been brought low, then stood again, now choosing not to kneel before victory. I didn't win alone, and I'm not here to claim glory. No one clapped. They kept listening, like every word he spoke held enough gravity to keep them still. Malcolm didn't retell the past. He didn't think with scripted phrases. He continued, voice steady and paced, like a living manifesto. I stand here with three things, 3 first steps, not because I'm better than anyone, but because I believe if we don't clarify what matters most, this win means nothing. He held up 3 fingers, then lowered them one by one as he laid it out. Halm, I will establish an independent oversight committee made up of nominees from the community, not appointed by me. They will monitor me, the police department, every budget line, every deployment, every decision that affects the people. 2. I will reopen every internal file buried over the past decade, all the ignored complaints, every unclear case, every suspension without discipline. 3. I will publicly release the full roadmap for reforming the police department, step, by person in charge, by timeline, and allow citizens to track progress through an open online platform. No one has the right to act in the dark, not even me. No applause followed those 3 promises. The crowd stayed still, silent, wide-eyed, then bowing their heads, not out of submission, but as a reflex when faced with something too real to decorate. A man near the barricade blinked fast. Beside him, a 10-year-old girl tugged his sleeve, whispering, "What did he just promise?" He replied, "He just handed the keys to the people." She looked puzzled but nodded like she understood. On social media, the 15-minute live stream began spreading quickly. People didn't caption it "our new sheriff," but wrote things like, "He didn't promise what would make us happy. He promised what would make us watch him closely." No one sang. No one shouted. But in the eyes of thousands facing the stage, there was unity without vote, agreement without words, not because he said all the right things, but because he dared to remain unvarnished, even after winning. And then, one by one, in groups, from West Ashley neighborhoods to Ladson markets, from teachers to veterans, from single mothers to former skeptics, they nodded. A nod not planned, not synchronized, but unanimous and full. Malcolm didn't smile. He only bowed once more, then stepped back from the mic. His figure disappeared into the darkness behind the stage, not shining but clear, as was the path he had chosen, not for victory, but to stay true to the faith that carried him there. The press conference took place in the 3rd-floor hall of the newly renovated Charleston Police Department headquarters. There were no banners, no slogans, just a long table draped in black cloth, a row of microphones, and white lights shining directly on the face of the woman currently occupying the hottest seat in the city, Captain Maria Estrada. Standing beside her was a representative of the Independent Oversight Committee, a civilian group nominated by the community just 3 weeks after Malcolm Reed was sworn in. Everyone present knew this wasn't a typical press event. The media turnout was large, with some networks broadcasting live. Even national outlets had sent correspondents, aware that what was about to be announced wouldn't just shake Charleston. It might set a precedent for the entire state. Estrada didn't preface her remarks with thanks or justifications. She placed a nearly 300-page printout on the table, as thick as a once-suppressed classified dossier, and her voice rang clearly through the microphone. She stated that their internal report spanned 276 pages, documenting 41 cases that were intentionally concealed from investigative systems, 17 files tampered with by high-ranking internal actors, and 11 officers, from the rank of lieutenant upward, who had committed ethical violations ranging from evidence suppression to witness coercion and the dismissal of misconduct complaints. There were no applause, only the sound of cameras clicking. Names, once considered pillars of the institution, were read out. No initials, no redactions. Cases previously dismissed due to lack of evidence now included clear timestamps. Individuals involved, those who interfered, and those who were forced into silence. When asked by a reporter why she chose to release the full report, without redacting names, Estrada didn't blink. She said she didn't believe anyone had the authority to stand above the law, or the moral clarity to decide who had the right to know and who didn't. The shock didn't come with shouting, but with the dense silence that followed each page turned. The full PDF was uploaded online during the conference itself, reaching over 20,000 downloads in 3 hours. Online communities dubbed it the Charleston Papers. A local radio host during the evening commentary remarked that no one had ever lifted the sewer lid that deep and dared to look at what crawled beneath. The following morning, 7 senior officers submitted early retirement notices. Inside the department, once powerful cliques that had long influenced appointments and transfers began to dissolve quietly. A sergeant, choosing to remain anonymous, called a local TV station and left a message saying he wasn't sure he still deserved to stay, but at least now he knew he served in a force that no longer hid its hands. No one knew exactly where the system would go from here, but one thing was certain: the light had been turned on, and no one would be allowed to remain in the dark. 2 weeks after the internal investigation report was released, Charleston entered an unprecedented period of structural reform. It didn't begin with loud purges or top-down appointments. Instead, small announcements and quiet but firm decisions began emerging from Malcolm Reed's office, in coordination with Captain Estrada and the Independent Oversight Committee. In a closed-door briefing with journalists, Malcolm spoke briefly, saying they weren't restructuring just to change people, but to open the gates for those who had long been left outside, and he followed through. The first name made public was Jerome Miller, 26, who had been wrongfully arrested in 2019 due to mistaken identity in a store robbery. Despite having no prior record, Jerome was held for 72 hours, lost a university scholarship, and didn't have his record cleared until 2022. Now he had been appointed to the Field Response Review Board, which reviews intervention cases that breach protocol, something he once experienced firsthand. Jerome didn't speak much. At his swearing-in, he simply said he didn't believe he could change the entire system, but he wanted to help prevent it from repeating what it had done to him. Another introduction followed. Althea Gordon, a high school teacher who had once filed a complaint after being subjected to racist language by a police officer during a traffic stop in 2017. Her complaint had been dismissed due to lack of body cam evidence. This time, she was invited to serve as a community representative on the Personnel Committee, contributing directly to recruitment, promotion, and disciplinary procedures within the department. Standing before the microphone, eyes glistening, Althea said she didn't need an apology from the person who hurt her. She needed a system that listened, and now she was being invited into the room instead of being turned away at the door. Inside the new departments, unfamiliar faces began to appear on staffing boards. Young people, people of color, individuals with disabilities, even those who had once been wrongfully imprisoned. Not all of them were fully comfortable in their new roles, but they were trusted and supported. Local media described the shift as a generational transfer born of awakening. A columnist for the Charleston Voice wrote that, for the first time, those who had been silenced weren't just invited to speak, they were brought into the very places where voices could become action. But the public said it more simply. For the first time, the system didn't just apologize, it opened the door. The day Malcolm Reed was sworn in as Sheriff of Charleston County passed without spectacle. There was no oversized American flag, no marching band, and none of the celebratory imagery usually associated with victory. The oath ceremony took place in a small conference room inside the administrative building, attended by a modest group: everyday citizens, community leaders, people who had once filed complaints in silence, and a handful of high school students invited as observers. Malcolm walked up to the podium dressed as he always had been: a white shirt, sleeves rolled, no uniform, no insignia, no white gloves. His face no longer carried the intensity of a soldier, but the quiet resolve of someone who understood that the real challenge still lay ahead. When the microphone clicked on, he didn't begin with gratitude or grand promises. Instead, he said one sentence that changed the tone of the entire room. He wasn't a hero, just proof that justice could still have a chance if people stopped looking away. That simple line, unexpected and direct, silenced the room, not with drama, but with truth. He didn't bring up his campaign or speak of hardships endured. He directed his words to the community representatives seated in the front row, acknowledging that he stood there because too many had been turned away from that same space, not for doing wrong, but simply for not fitting a mold. He admitted that the very system he was now taking charge of had been built on fear rather than trust. It had treated people like case numbers and chosen personnel by familiarity. He didn't shift blame or offer excuses, but he named it clearly, directly, without apology. He addressed the racial and social disparities head-on, stating that society had demanded more proof of innocence from those who were black, brown, poor, or simply spoke differently. It wasn't just racial discrimination, he said. It was the devaluation of human dignity, a long crack stretching across generations, offices, and the archives of forgotten reports. And now, standing there, he said he had not come to cover the crack with fresh paint, but to tear it open and rebuild it from its foundation. There was no applause, but every face in the room, from the retired school teacher whose complaint had been ignored to the elderly security guard once stopped without cause, seemed to sit with a little more strength in their posture. They didn't see a polished public official. They saw someone who had survived not war in a foreign land, but the slow violence of a system that tried to grind away integrity. Malcolm turned to the students seated along the back wall. He told them they would grow up in a world where police would no longer hold unquestioned authority. In their world, the people would have the right to ask why and the power to challenge why not. He ended the speech not with rhetoric, but with a declaration that quickly found its way into headlines across the country. This wasn't an ending, he said. It was the beginning, a point where leadership could no longer be silent in the face of injustice, and communities would no longer remain silent when wronged. There was no national anthem, no closing toast. The room emptied quietly, like the conclusion of an important meeting. Outside, Charleston's skies weren't bright or stormy. Only a gentle breeze stirred, like a soft reminder that this fight had never been about claiming power. It had always been about restoring what had once been lost between red stamps, dusty files, and years of silence. The story of Malcolm Reed is not just a campaign journey of a former veteran once handcuffed at a gas station. It's a mirror reflecting this truth. Sometimes, those who are misjudged are the ones who hold on to their values the strongest. In a society where prejudice can kill a person's chances in seconds, this story reminds us not to judge anyone just because they don't look like us, or because they've made mistakes. Talent, courage, and integrity don't lie in appearances or spotless records, but in how someone stands back up when pushed to the edge. Malcolm didn't win with tears nor with loud slogans. He won because he dared to stand still in the storm of public opinion, without lying, without running. And that truth, even if imperfect, was what restored justice to its rightful place. Have you ever been misjudged by someone who didn't know you? Have you ever been underestimated only to quietly prove you were stronger than they thought? If this story made you think, share it so more people can find their own lesson in it. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that inspire. Real people, real courage, real justice.